Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into the powerful story of a young woman whose faith just burned so brightly even during one of the Roman Empire's darkest persecutions. This is the incredible story of Saint Lucy, a figure whose very name means light. And honestly, that one word is the key to her entire story. The name Lucia, it comes directly from the Latin word for light, lux. It's almost like her name was a prophecy, perfectly foreshadowing her legacy as this beacon of hope in the darkness. So here's the journey we're going to take today. First, we'll meet the girl named Light. Then, we'll see the vow and the miracle that completely sealed her fate. We're going to stand with her through her trial by fire and faith, decode all the amazing symbols of her legacy, and finally, see how her light is still shining today.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story begins in a world of shadow, literally. Lucy was born right into the heart of the Roman Empire, a time and a place that wasn't just powerful, but was incredibly dangerous for anyone who shared her Christian faith.
Now, what's just wild when you look at this timeline is how short and intense her life was. She was born around 283 AD in Syracuse, Sicily, and her life lines up almost perfectly with the brutal Diocletian persecution. And then by 304 AD, she was gone, martyred at only about 21 years old. Just incredible.
So who exactly was Lucy? Well, she came from a very wealthy family, a life of privilege. But her father died when she was young, and her mother, Eutychia, arranged for her to marry a rich pagan nobleman. Now this set up a huge internal conflict because, and this is the key, Lucy had already made a secret vow to dedicate her entire life to Christ.
And this private, personal conflict, it's about to explode into a full-blown public crisis. A single act of faith is going to change absolutely everything.
The big turning point comes when her mother gets really sick. Lucy, desperate, convinces her to go on a pilgrimage to the tomb of another female martyr, Saint Agatha. And there, a miracle happens. Her mother is healed. Lucy sees this as a sign from God, and she finally tells her mother about her vow. Her mom, so grateful, agrees not only to call off the wedding, but to give away Lucy's entire dowry to the city's poor. But this incredible act of charity, it backfires. Big time. Her rejected suitor, who is absolutely furious at losing both his bride and her fortune, betrays her. He goes straight to the Roman governor and denounces her as a Christian, which, under Emperor Diocletian, was basically a death sentence. And this is the climax of her story, her trial. This is where this one young woman is forced to confront the full, terrifying power of the Roman Empire, a true confrontation with darkness.
She's brought before the governor, a guy named Pausanias, and he orders her to renounce her faith and make a sacrifice to the emperor. Her response was simple, direct, and just completely unshakable. I belong to Christ. I will never be separated from him.
And you gotta ask, right? She's just one person, facing torture and death. How could she possibly resist the entire Roman Empire? Well, according to the tradition, she didn't have to do it alone.
So the governor, completely enraged, orders his soldiers to drag her off to a brothel, but they couldn't move her. She became miraculously, supernaturally immovable. It's like her spiritual purity was given this physical shield. They brought in more men, they brought in ropes, they even brought in teams of oxen, and she didn't budge an inch.
And then we get to the most famous part of her story, the part that involves her eyes. Now, some versions of the story say her torturers gouged them out. Others say she took them out herself to disgust her suitor. But no matter which version you hear, the ending is the same. God miraculously restored her sight, and that's what cemented her as the patron saint for the blind.
So, unable to break her will, unable to humiliate her, the governor just ordered her execution. Her final testimony was given by a sword to the throat. They took her life, but her spirit, her faith, that remained completely undefeated. But her death wasn't the end, not even close. It was really the beginning of a legacy, one that's been passed down for centuries, not just in stories, but through some really powerful symbols.
And what's incredible is just how fast her story spread. By the 6th century, just a couple hundred years after her death, people were so devoted to her that her name was officially added to the Roman canon. That's one of the main prayers of the Mass, which means she was placed among the most revered martyrs of the early church. That's a huge deal.
So, whenever you see a painting or a statue of St. Lucy, you should look for these symbols. The eyes on a plate, that's a direct reference to the miracle of her sight being restored.
The lamp or candle, well, that represents her name, Lucia, light. The palm branch is an ancient symbol for the victory of a martyr over death. And that wreath of candles, we're getting to that right now.
And that brings us right up to today, because Lucy's light, it is still shining, and in some really fascinating traditions in two very different parts of Europe.
On December 13th, her feast day, you have these two amazing traditions. Up in Scandinavia, her story kind of merged with old winter solstice festivals, and now it's this huge celebration of light during the darkest time of the year, led by a young girl wearing that famous wreath of candles. Meanwhile, back in her home of Sicily, the celebration is more religious, with solemn processions and special foods that commemorate a famine she was said to have ended.
So, at the end of the day, why does her story still stick with us almost 1,700 years later? I think it's because it hits on these universal themes. She's a symbol of just incredible courage. She's a witness to what purity and dedication look like. She's an amazing example of charity for the poor. But more than anything, she is the ultimate emblem of light pushing back the darkness.
And that really leaves us with this one powerful thought, a verse from the Gospel of John that just perfectly sums up her whole life and legacy. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. St. Lucy's story is proof of the idea that a single, determined flame of faith can absolutely outshine even the deepest of shadows.